The optimist says the glass is half full. The pessimist says it's half empty. The realist sees that the water is probably poisoned. Congratulations, your life is currently being ruined by the most dangerous delusion you possess: optimism bias. You aren't just positive, you are cognitively hardwired to assume that bad things only happen to other, less interesting people. Research from University College London shows your neural pathways are essentially pathological cheerleaders. They ignore every signal that you're doomed and inflate every tiny shred of evidence that feeds your ego. You're building a 5-star life on a foundation of sand, pal. While you're busy dreaming, realistic planning is the cynical accountant in the back of your mind, trying to tell you that you're already bankrupt. If you can't tell the difference between a goal and a fantasy, you aren't an optimist. You're just reckless. If you want to stop driving your future off a cliff, subscribe. We're about to force your mind to actually look at the data. Call me sage. I run on logic. You run on instincts. So yeah, your mind is reasonably deluded. But don't worry. Comment your weirdest mental shortcut and keep the diagnostics coming. Friends, let's stroll now into the battlefield between optimism bias and realistic planning. A place where your brain says, "I'll finish this project in 2 hours," while your calendar whispers, "Sweetie, no." Firstly, optimism bias helps you stay motivated. Secondly, it keeps you from collapsing under the weight of reality. And next, it gives you the courage to start things you'd otherwise avoid. Research from 2015 at the University of Pennsylvania shows that optimistic people persist longer and recover faster from setbacks. In other words, optimism is the emotional caffeine shot that keeps you going. However, optimism bias becomes a problem when it hijacks your planning. It's like having a GPS that insists every destination is just 5 minutes away, even if you're crossing a continent. One practical example. You assume you'll save money next month, despite having said that for the last 27 months. Moreover, research from 2018 at Duke University shows that people consistently underestimate how long tasks will take, a phenomenon known as the planning fallacy. Consequently, your to-do list becomes a fantasy novel. Another issue is that optimism bias makes you believe you're the exception. For instance, you think you'll stick to your budget, even though, statistically, you behave exactly like everyone else who doesn't. Besides, optimism bias whispers, "It won't happen to me," which is adorable but unhelpful. To illustrate, imagine someone building a boat and saying, "I don't need waterproofing. The ocean likes me." Then there's realistic planning, the grown-up in the room. Realistic planning doesn't kill dreams, it gives them legs. For this reason, it involves breaking goals into steps, estimating time honestly, and preparing for setbacks. Research from 2014 at MIT shows that people who plan using evidence rather than hope achieve goals more consistently. In other words, realistic planning is the friend who tells you that your spontaneous road trip needs gas, snacks, and maybe a map. On the other hand, realistic planning can feel boring. Optimism bias is fun. It's the glitter glue of the mind. Also, optimism makes you feel invincible, whereas realistic planning reminds you that you are, in fact, a human with limited time, energy, and possibly questionable decision-making skills. However, combining the two creates a powerful balance. Optimism gives you the spark. Planning gives you the structure. And by the way, if your calendar looks like a fantasy novel written by an overconfident elf, the books below break down why your brain keeps saying, "It'll be fine." They're affiliate links, tiny boosts for the channel. There's also a free PDF quiz on your optimism waiting for you. Despite your best intentions, optimism bias will sneak in. Nevertheless, you can outsmart it. One strategy is to imagine your plan has failed in a couple of months and ask, what went wrong? For example, if your goal is to write a book, your imagination exercise might reveal that future you is just as distractible as current you. Notably, research from 2007 at the University of Michigan shows that this imagination exercise can improve accuracy in planning by up to 30%. It's called a pre-mortem scenario. Literally, when you imagine your brilliant plan has already died, then you perform an emotional autopsy on it, and finally admit, yes, this is exactly where I shot myself in the leg. Another strategy is using external feedback. Ask someone who knows you and isn't afraid to laugh at your delusions, whether your timeline makes sense. Meanwhile, research from 2019 at the University of Toronto shows that outside observers predict task duration more accurately than the person doing the task. In addition, they're less emotionally attached to your fantasy version of yourself. So the pessimist says, "It can't get any worse," and the optimist replies, "Oh, yes, it can." Do you see now? Optimism bias isn't the enemy. It's the spark that gets you moving. But hey, realistic planning is the map that keeps you from wandering into a swamp. Together, they help you dream boldly without crashing into the wall of, "Oh no, why did I think I could do this in one weekend?" Finally, balancing optimism bias with realistic planning is a lifelong dance. You wobble, you adjust. You overestimate your abilities. You laugh, and you try again. Overall, the goal is not to eliminate optimism. That would make life unbearably dull. But to anchor it with enough realism that your dreams don't float away like escaped balloons. To summarize, optimism bias makes you believe the future will be bright. Realistic planning hands you sunscreen, sunglasses, and a schedule. The final message? Dear optimist, pessimist, and realist. While you were arguing over that glass of water, I drank it. Signed, The Opportunist.